Yeah, I have started recording. Yeah.
Okay. So, Rose, are you started the recording?
Sir, just starting, just starting.
Right, right. So, okay. So, can I move ahead?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is rather too awkward, but anyway, we'll have to think of some solution to this. But okay. Uh, y- you know, I mean, uh, I in this class I will go more directly into Unit One, directly in the sense that I will engage head on the question of clarifying those key terms: modernity, modernization, etc., that configure the course. But in the last class, before I went to do so, I thought it was important as you know some kind of closures, because so once you say the modernization, modern implies this or that, then somewhere you are putting it within a certain enclosure. So the preliminary remarks that I made in the last class, and the opening remark that I'm going to make now, has to be uh, has to form the backdrop in which we begin to look at those clarifications that I'm going to effect in today's class, and perhaps in the in the next class as well, right? Of course, uh, I think some of these preliminaries may seem to be complicating the ground too quickly, and I accept that it might imply complicating the ground too quickly. But nevertheless, I think it's important for us to keep this set of preliminary remarks in mind, right? Not just what I said in the last class, but also some of the uh, 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 ideas that I invoked in the first class as well, right? Of course, that was not recorded, but in the first introductory class, I just kind of took you through the concerns of the course and so on, right? But I also highlighted two key aspects of the self-positioning of this course, that we are actually engaging with the scholarly discourse on modernity, so modernity as a category of analysis, and secondly, that this burden of a critique of modernity that a lot of uh, you know the critical scholarship shares is not something that the course takes as a determined thing, right? And then, of course, the larger order of remarks that I made in the last class, right? So I think it's important to keep some of these preliminary remarks in mind. In fact, the Dirlik essay that I shared with you in the last class, after the last class, I think harps on themes that we will keep returning to later as well, right? Etc. I think that Dirlik essay also engages with China, and there is some larger engagement with patterns of modernity and modernization in the context of China. I don't think that is really relevant for our purposes, although you can read it for your own interests and other concerns. But I think it's the theoretical and conceptual landscape that Dirlik is mapping, which I think is crucial for our in the class. If you recall, we also had a pointed discussion where, especially in the light of a certain remark that I was making through Dirlik itself, that you know, I mean that one of the I mean with the resurgence of history and the newer modes of historical attention that is wreaked on modernity, clearly implies that modernity can no longer be approached as a dialogue which is internal to Europe, right, etc. Okay, or to Euro-America. That there is something global about the discourse of modernity in which many participate, and it's not restricted to Europe or Euro-America. Okay, and in that context of this global discourse, there are different formulations on modernity as lived and experienced within local societies, so local social realities, and so on. And I made this remark through Dirlik also that in a manner of speaking, this could well seem, right, a fulfillment of modernity, right? Because modernity always carried with it the promise of some universality, as it were, right? Okay. I mean that everyone could aspire to be modern. Of course, there may be temporal lags in that process of achieving modernity, but everybody is destined to go into modernity and so on. There was some promise of modernity, which and I remember this was a set of considerations where Revati pointedly pinned us down on that issue, and I tried to open out the terrain of that contention, because I think even as we recognize that there are multiple modernities, right, that the Euro-American form of modernity is not the only form of modernity as part of the global discourse. Nevertheless, I think how do we go about evaluating these different modernities becomes an important issue, right? So somewhere it's important that we also engage with the idea of modern, even as we open out to the possibility there can be multiple moderns, right, etc. And I think this is a theme which we will keep returning to, and I hope to arrive at a certain answer when I engage with an important essay by Charles Taylor called Two Theories of Modernity, what he calls cultural and accultural theories of modernity. I'll come to that a little later. But I think there is one important preliminary that we need to keep in mind, which in a sense also modulates the way in which our course proceeds, because as the course proceeds, it goes into a historicization, is that that somewhere, and Dirlik also makes this point, right? He also makes this point about that there is in modernity a certain historicization of time, right? But then even as it historicized time, there was also a tendency within modernity to marginalize alternative temporalities, which did not accord with the teleology of modernity and so on. I mean, this question of the temporality of modernity is again a theme we will return to later, right? More systematically later in the course. So I'm just flagging kind of concerns that are very important, but and the clarifications that we offer, the initial set of clarifications that we offer about those terms should not be seen as kind of determinations that have to be taken note of. I mean, they are necessary. Those clarifications are necessary, but we need to. There is something more that we need to be doing. Yes, Raunak.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sir, I would just like to ask you, sir, what should we exactly understand by the term historicizing time? Like, how should we define it exactly? Historicization of time.
No. See, I think there are different ways in which we think about historicizing time, right? But when
Yes, sir. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, there are many ways of historicizing time. I agree, right? But incidentally, in the sociological characterization of modernity, and if you read Anthony Giddens among others, you will find, and I will go into that also later, that there is some kind of a time-space compression under conditions of modernity, right, etc. But I think let's not get into those levels of complication. I think when we say that we need to historicize time, right, etc. What we are saying is that insofar as the category modernity is concerned, it is often defined in terms of temporal coordinates, right? That somewhere along the way, modernity implies a constant process of renewing itself, and some kind of an eternal newness, as it were, right? In fact, the German word for modernity, Neuzoid, actually captures this. It says Neuzoid means new time, right, etc. Okay. So what one is saying is, when we say that we need to historicize time, there are different ways of historicizing time. I agree, right? I mean, you can think in terms of, say, you know, linear time. You can also think in terms of more cyclical notions of time. You can, etc. So there can be different ways in which you can think about temporality and change, right? A process of becoming, as it were, right? But I think in the context of modernity, what is being raised often about historicization of time is the constant call to renewal that is seen to be intrinsic to modernity, right, etc. But of course, there are, as I said, other dimensions that can attach to this question, because there are scholars who will argue that, look, modernity is not only temporalizing, but it's also spatializing, etc. Because so time and space cannot be distinguished in the context of modernity, and sociological descriptions take this forward, as it were, right? But I think we will engage with some of these questions as we move along. But I think for the moment, it's important to point out that that if modernity is now some kind of a global discourse, right? Okay, and the resurgence of history in the context of modernity as a global discourse implies not the victory of the Eurocentric conception of modernity, but in its historicization. I think the demands for historicizing modernity have only increased, right? And so I think it's important that our exercises of clarifying these terms also take the burden of these historicizing compulsions that have come to modernity as some kind of a new global discourse, separate from its Euro-American posturings or embedding and so on, right? So I think, which is not to imply that we cannot still pose new questions, and I think the course will try to pose some of those questions in the light of the literature, as it were, right? But in fact, in the early part of the Dirlik essay itself, there is, when he engages with the theoretical discourse on modernity, there is, some allusion to this idea. How that modernity gets into a certain historicization of time, but that historicization of time is premised upon, as Dirlik points out, right, marginalize other temporalities which do not accord with the teleologies of modernity. So whenever we think about temporality or time, we are also thinking about processes of change and processes of becoming, right, etc. So I and but then even as you admit that everybody is in a process of change, or all societies, cultures, politics are in a process of change, are in a constant state of becoming, there is a sense in which either you posit that not everybody moves in the same pace, or you will point out that some are not capable of moving at all, and so on. That's how a certain temporality that attaches to the modernity category also gets to be spatialized, right, etc. For instance, in the in the 40s and the 50s, at least during the heydays of modernization theory, in the original avatar, it was argued that modernity is the overcoming of tradition, right? So tradition is some kind of a burden, okay, that has to be moved beyond if the temporality of modernity has to be sustained, etc. So I'm just trying to, Raunak, I'm only trying to, I mean, in replying to your question, I'm only pointing out different ways in which this question of historicization of time can proceed. But we will get back to these questions in more concrete detail as we go along. Is that okay?
No, sir, I understood it adequately this time. Yeah, understood.
Yeah. Okay. So let me now okay, that with the resurgence of history, right, there is also a new imperative on the scholarship, right, to historicize modernity, right? Okay, and that and as Derlick puts it, the globalization of modernity has issued not in the victory of Eurocentric modernity, but in its historicization. Now, what are the implications of this? How do we work it out? Are issues that I think we must keep in mind when we proceed with the contents of our course. Now, with these loaded remarks, and I recognize that these are fairly loaded remarks, and also in a manner of speaking, also perhaps a little heavy, right? I think it's important to get into some clarification. And I wanted to bring this, I mean, as I clarified in the beginning, I wanted to bring these loaded remarks because I think some of the clarifications that I offer now will, will simplify the gravity of those remarks, and because it is simplifying, we may get too complacent with the category. I think these preliminary remarks that I made are to imply that the clarifications that I'm now going to offer about modernity, modernization, modern, etc., okay, are not to be seen as final summations of modernity or modernization or of the modern, but there is a large, wider terrain also to be engaged with, which the course will take on, right? So now with these preliminary sense, as I said, nevertheless, let us proceed with these key terms in our course, right? Okay. Now, I want to start with a statement which Descartes makes, right? I mean, the early modern scholar, the European scholar René Descartes, right? And I'm quoting Descartes, right? Okay. I must once for all seriously undertake to rid myself of all opinions which I had formerly accepted, right? And commence to build anew from the foundation, okay? If I want, uh, uh, if I want to establish any firm and permanent structure in the sciences, right? This is one remark that is there. In fact, you can actually read it in his discourse on method, right? Etc. Incidentally, this. I mean, there is a whole pattern of doubt that that Descartes is giving expression to, and how we. I mean, we must doubt, but we must also the whole attempt at knowledge is to arrive at some certainty, right? Some form of certainty and so on, right? And that's what this expression is keeping in mind. But I'm not going to go into a exegetical thing. But I'm just trying to point out, that the kind of resolution, I mean, the resolve that Descartes is expressing there, right, is as good an expression, as any of the process of becoming modern, all right, etc. Okay, of course, many other ways of expressing processes of becoming modern can be formulated, but somewhere, this quote that I gave from Descartes expresses a particular resolve that is involved in the process of becoming modern. So let me just re-quote Descartes, right? I'm quoting, I must once for all seriously undertake to rid myself of all opinions which I had formerly accepted and commence to build anew from the foundation, from that foundation where I've set aside all opinions, right? If I want to establish any firm and permanent structure in the sciences, or in knowledge, as it were, right? So I think, of course, there are many ways in which, this expression of and the resolve of becoming modern can be expressed, but Descartes' resolution, in a manner of speaking, also captures, I think, a very key aspect of the process of becoming modern, right? Now, as such, therefore, modernity, right? What we call modernity, and I'm using the word here, modernity, to imply the process of becoming modern, right? Remains a problematical concept, right? Right? At best, a complex concept, right? At worst, a concept which is riven with inconsistencies and problems, and some might even say that it obscures real understandings of processes and so on, right? Etc. Okay. So even as we recognize that modernity implies a process of becoming modern, right? And right, of course, there's more to modernity than just that expression. Nevertheless, we must recognize that what we call modernity, or at least the word used to designate the process of becoming modern, is a problematical concept. At one level, a pretty complex concept. At the other extreme, a seriously problematical concept, in the sense that it is very inconsistent and inadequate, and that we need to substitute that concept with something else, right? We will see later why, for instance, there are, at least at one level of the Marxist discourse, at one stage of the Marxist discourse, there was an attempt to argue that, look, we need to substitute modernity with capitalism. Okay, because what the historical realities that underlie whatever the processes of becoming modern is captured by modernity, right, is actually the processes of capitalism, right? So why use a term which obscures these processes? Let's get into the, the real historical reality, the concrete reality that modernity expresses, namely capitalism. I mean, this was one stage during the although Marxists now are a little more open-ended about the category, and we will see that later in the course, right? So I think it's important that even as we recognize that there can be different understandings of modernity or the processes of becoming modern, okay, there is a sense in which modernity remains a problematical concept, right? All the same, okay, I think it's important also to recognize that even after the critique of modernization, what is called modernization theory, and I'm using this expression modernization theory here to imply, okay, the work of an whole earlier generation of social scientists who spoke about modernization theory in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on, right? Okay, etc. And clearly, people are moved beyond the kind of confidence and assertions of the earlier forms of modernization theory. But nevertheless, even after the criticisms of what is called classical modernization theory, right, there is still something significant about modernization, and the theory still remains, right? Okay. In other words, what I mean is that we have still not been able, okay, to discredit ourselves or divest ourselves of the conviction, right, that our time, our epoch is modern, right? That the epoch in which we live is a modern epoch, right? Etc. This is notwithstanding the fact that there were the earlier protagonists of modernization theory have been discredited, and we will see what was the problem with it as we go along, right? Okay. Now, so even as patterns of theorization of modernization theory have been critiqued, vehemently critiqued. Okay, there is still something of the understanding of modernity and modernization that still remains, right? Namely, that I don't think any of us have been able to divest ourselves of the conviction, right, that our epoch, the epoch in which we obtain, okay, is modern, and modern not only in a relative sense, okay, but also in some absolute sense. I mean, what I mean by this relative sense, meaning, that somebody might say, okay, yes, we have been modern, where we use the word modern to imply something most recent, right? Almost defining it as contemporary, right? Etc. But there are others who also will say that our epoch is modern, not just in this relative sense of alluding to the contemporary, right? But also in a more absolute sense. Now I'm stressing this word contemporary. I mean this relative sense to imply, because I mean there is this wonderful anthropological theorist who passed away a few months back, Paul Rabinow, who actually speaks of the anthropology of the contemporary, right? And in fact, he has pioneered a whole project on that agenda of the anthropology of the contemporary. And Rabineau has our claim to attention because seriously interesting at the forefront of a certain passage through Foucault's work and so on. That's why this idea of invoking a relative sense of modernity is also important in that light, right? And in Rabineau's own work, he has tried to actually work with Weber and Foucault to articulate a sense of the modern epoch, modernity as signifying something contemporary, right? I may not go into I may not go into Rabineau in the context of our course, but no, yes, Raunak, I just saw your message that I think Rona well brought for the yes, he has spoken about biosociality, but you know, but I think it's this larger positioning of this biosociality in an anthropology of the contemporary, which is important, right? And you will find that his attempt to negotiate the anthropology of the contemporary has been a part of an engagement with our understanding of modernity itself, right? So I don't think that even as certain vestiges of modernization theory have been criticized, and rightly so, there are still hangovers from definitions of modernity and modernization that still remain and which undergird the conviction that our epoch is modern, not merely in a relative sense as signifying something contemporary, but also in an absolute sense, that there is something about modernity which implies a deep rupture from the past and so on, although the dating of it is something which will differ from scholars to scholars. And again, these are issues which we will touch upon later, right? Now, so I think you have a lot of writers and scholars, right, who have attempted different characterizations of modernity, right? Right, and our course will take you through some of that literature. As I said, more the scholarly literature than say the more primary literature on modernity, where we look at writers and so on, etc. But I think it's important to point out that a lot of reflection, academic reflection, and also larger social aesthetic reflection on modernity has happened, and there are different characterizations of modernity. Some of these characterizations allude to its explanatory power. And some others disputing its value, right? And I've already hinted at this earlier when I said that there was an unease with the category that modernity is an unnatural category, right? And that capitalism is a more natural category that we need to use to explain realities and so on, right? Again, the relationship between modernity and capitalism is something that we will need to think about a little more systematically, and so on, right? Etc. So even as there are different characterizations of modernity, some attesting to its explanatory value, some disputing its value, etc. There is no discounting the fact that whole ranges of scholarship, right, are not oblivious of the category, right, etc. Right? Modernity, as it were, right, exists, right? Whether you thematize it in terms of techniques, right, or devices, or institutions, or in attitudes, again, again, these are different ways of understanding modernity, and I will take you through that later, more systematically, etc., and so on. So notwithstanding, what one is saying is that even as there are different characterizations of modernity, you know, it's important that there is some recognition that there is something there, whether acceptable or unacceptable. Modernity exists, whether it be in terms of institutions. Now, what are the institutions seen to be central to modernity? I will engage with the sociological understanding there, and I will take you through Giddens as part of this engagement, right? Certain, institutions and techniques, or in attitudes, certain cultural, that modernity is some kind of a cultural standpoint. Again, I'll take you through different understandings of that, which are there, and so on, right? So in fact, a lot of effort in the scholarship has gone towards finding out, how those that are lagging behind in modernity can quicken their pace of modernity, and those who have, and those who are living with modernity, how they have to bear its costs and cope with its challenges, right? As it were, right? So in a sense, what I'm saying is that modernity is certainly, as Descartes' meditation that I quoted from indicates, is clearly about change, right? About some rational, and I know the word rational is a very contested category, but I'm still deploying it, and the reason why I shared Weber's introduction to the Protestant ethic is precisely to signify this, because he sees that there is something in the pattern of change that Western societies have been able to effect, which that he's not arguing that other forms of other cultural forms are irrational, right? But there is a peculiar rationality that attaches to the Western form, which is quite important, and so on. And I'll alert you to some of the important passages in that introduction later. But what one is saying is that notwithstanding the fact that there can be different characterizations of modernity, modernity is certainly, as our quote from Descartes earlier indicated, about rational change, right? Okay. Now, of course, the cruder forms of modernization theory, right? The cruder versions of modernization theory actually projected, problematically also projected a simple three-stage development of this process of change, of rational change, right? From traditional through to transitional, okay, to modern societies, right? I mean, in the cruder forms of modernization theory, and nobody takes them seriously any longer, right? In fact, in these cruder forms of modernization theory, progress, right, is seen as synonymous with modernization, and modernization is synonymous with passages into industrial society, whether conceived in the pattern of capitalism, predominantly the pattern of capitalism, or industrial societies modeled on the socialist model at that point in time, right? Because a lot of earlier versions of modernization theory were captive to the Cold War logic of development, either along a capitalist groove or a non-capitalist, socialist pattern of development, and so on, right? Okay, so even as modernity is indicates change, there are different ways in which this pattern of change, seen as internal to modernity, are theorized. So in the cruder forms of modernization theory, there is a simple three-stage development from traditional to transitional to modern, and so on. Okay. Now, clearly, these cruder forms of modernization theory, right? And I'm stressing the word cruder, right? Crude, right? These are rigid forms. These cruder forms of modernization theory, which are no longer anybody takes seriously, okay, implicate, okay, a virtual absence of change in traditional societies, okay, as it were, right? That there is something in tradition which is an obstacle to change. I mean, it's seen that way, which definitely is a serious misunderstanding. And it's not surprising that the revisionist tendency within these cruder forms, when there were modernization theorists who were working with modernization paradigm, but sought to revise this cruder theory. And one of the first things that they did was not to see tradition as an obstacle to change, right, etc. Okay, okay, okay. So what one is saying is that definitely in these cruder forms of modernization theory, especially in the 50s and the 60s, 1950s and the 60s, I mean this tendency not to allow for the possibility of change in traditional societies was definitely a serious misunderstanding, right? But I think there is something still we need to alert ourselves to with reference to these cruder forms of modernization theory. In fact, I don't know, you all have had a course on the sociology of development, isn't it? You all have had the course already?
Yes, I will heard.
Yeah. But of course, it's quite possible that the genealogy of the concept of development I don't know if it was traversed in the course, but if you implicate the genealogy of development, I mean, and that if you were to see development as a post-Second World War concept, you will find that the development as a post-Second World War concept actually incarnates as a cruder form of modernization theory, right, etc. Okay, so that's part of the genealogy, and I'm just trying to link it up with certain concerns that you already have taken as part of your courses, but I have no clue what really went on out there, right? But I think it's important that that while there was definitely a misunderstanding built into these cruder forms of modernization theory, okay, I mean, and that misunderstanding was a serious one in the sense that it sought to deny change or the possibility of change within tradition, etc. I think it's also important to see what the theory, the cruder theory, was getting at, right? Okay, the cruder forms of modernization theory was actually getting at the pace of change, right? So it's one thing to say that the cruder forms of modernization theory were denying change altogether. Okay, there were some scholars within the cruder forms who actually spoke on those lines, right? But more importantly, even the cruder form was actually alerting to the pace of change, that within tradition, the pace of change is slow, right? Etc. Okay. So what, you know, if we look at the older forms of modernization theory along this lens, that what the modernization theory was speaking about was not so much against change or denying the possibility of change in traditional societies, but rather actually thematizing the pace of change, right? The speed of change, right? Then, right? I mean that in traditional societies, change is not quick. It's a much more uh, 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 slower process, gradual process, and so on. It actually implies that there is something about modern which has to do with acceleration, right? Etc. Now, if the problem was with the pace of change, then the kind of acceleration that part of modernity was not traditional societies and so on, right? Okay. Now, different ways of labeling this acceleration, right? I mean, some may call it acceleration as part of okay, etc. But there is a sense in which if we see the older modernization, the pace, right? There is an inbuilt, there is a tendency to argue that acceleration, okay, in change, okay, can come about only through social transformations that are technological, social, economic, and so on, etc. Right? And that this accelerated process of change, right, is only possible within modern societies that are premised on urbanism, industrialism, certain processes of individuation, and mass politics, mass politicization, and so on, right? Okay, and so on. So if, in other words, what I'm saying is that while there was something patently mistaken about the older versions of modernization theory, nevertheless, if we were to say that what the theory was harping on was about the pace of change, then there is a presumption here built into the theory that modernity is about accelerating changes, okay, and especially acceleration that comes with urbanization, industrialization, uh, quote unquote secularization, or forms of individuation, mass politicization, democracy, and so on. Of course, not all these products, right, okay, of modernity or of if question is about about the pace of change, and that modernity or modernization implies all these concomitants, namely industrialization, urbanization, secularization, mass politicization, etc. Right? Then, you know, I mean, if you break this down, then we will get, it's important to break this down. In fact, I will later share an important essay by Sudipta Kaviraj called Outline of a Revisionist Theory of Modernity, right? And Kaviraj actually makes some very interesting points about, both modernity and modernization, which I think are very crucial for us to consider. But I'll come to that a little later. So what I'm trying to indicate is that if the older versions of modernization theory are actually about the pace of change, and in the context of the pace of change signifying modernity and modernization as having to do with these products, there is nothing new in these products. Not all these products are new, right? Are absolutely new, right? For instance, and this is where the class got interrupted. Urbanization, which is often taken as a primary index of modernity, is hardly new in itself. In fact, if you look at ancient cultures, there were vibrant urban traditions within them. I mean, if you look at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, for instance, as part of our antiquity, you will find that these are often harped as urban settlements and so on, right? Okay. But of course, somebody might argue that urbanization, now, of the scale that we see under modernity, maybe we don't have that same scale, right? Etc. Okay, urbanization to the point, at which less than half the population, lives, in cities. I mean, surely that scale that scale is an important issue, right? Etc. Okay. But the point is now I think while there might not be anything new in some of those features outlined, nevertheless there is still the question of scale that the question of pace of change is invoking, etc. Okay. Now, of course, it's another question whether this pace of change and the scale of change, if you were to get into peculiar features, etc., the pace and scale of change, you can also raise questions whether this pace and scale amounts to a single system, right? You can even ask whether, let alone whether it refers to an endpoint of all human development, right? So even as we might interrogate the question of the pace of change, right, in terms of its features, there is still this question within the idea of the pace of change, whether the pace of change refers to a single system or actually something else, right? Or you can also, of course, ask this question whether the pace of change is all directed towards a same conclusion, or the endpoint, whether this pace of change, this acceleration, so to say, is the endpoint of all human development, is the real question, right? In fact,
I mean, he's passed away, but over the duration of his scholarship, right, starting from older versions of modernization theory to revisionism in modernization theory, okay, Eisenstadt, over a scholarship ranging about 35 to 40 years, actually tries to bring worldwide perspectives, to bear on the question, right? Whether the pace of change that you see as internal to modernity and modernization, right, is a part of a single system of evolution, right? And so on, right? In fact, Eisenstadt, in his revisionism of modernization theory, actually focuses on historical patterns, right? Historical traditions and historical patterns of modernization and development, okay, and actually signals, Eisenstadt's work signals to a new awareness of the complexity of modernity and modernization, right, etc. So even as we admit that the older modernization theory was essentially about the pattern of change, there are still questions, or about the pace of change. There are still questions about the pattern and traditions that inform this change, which need to be addressed, right? So this question of whether this pace of change relates to is a single pattern, right? It amounts to a single system of development, or drawing from different sources, okay? Let alone whether this pace of change is an inevitable point of all human development. That is the nub of the issue. And among others, it's Eisenstadt who in his historical and sociological scholarship, right, has actually addressed this question, right? In fact, in a 2-volume work, right, which he edited, which is actually titled Patterns of Modernity, right? The first volume is exploring patterns of modernity in the West, right? And the second volume, this was published in the late 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, right? In a 2-volume work which he edited, Patterns of Modernity, one volume concentrating on the West, and the second volume concentrating on what was called Beyond the West, right? Because he's actually engaging with this question of change, right? And by looking at the historical traditions and patterns of change across, locales, as it were, he actually, in this 2-volume work, which he edited, there is some kind of a summary given, right, of the problematic of modernity and modernization, right? And I think it's important that in our clarificatory exercise, we engage with the terms of this introduction, right? Okay. Now,
in fact, introducing this volume, patterns of modernity in the West and beyond the West, he Eisenstadt calls for a reformulation of modernity and modernization, right? In the light of what he calls the variability, and these are his words, the variability of the symbolic, institutional, and ideological responses, the variability, right, in the symbolic, ideological, and institutional responses to what is called as the civilization, and these are his words, civilization of modernity, right? So while there is something civilizational about the modernity imperative, right, there are great variations in the response to the civilizational imperative to modernize, right? As it were, there are great variations, and that even as we recognize that modernity and modernization are essentially about change, both institutionally, ideologically, and symbolically, nevertheless, right, this change, these patterns of change that are emblematic of modernity show great variability, right? As it were, right? That's why Eisenstadt actually encourages us, right, to abandon any lingering traces, right, of a teleological or a Eurocentric view of modernity, right, etc., and to see it as some kind of a dynamic, a civilizational dynamic, right, happening at different parts of the globe, right? Of course, this civilizational dynamic, did take shape or in Europe, right? But even as it took shape in Europe, the civilizational dynamic, nevertheless, as it transmits itself, this dynamic, it does not retain, that original shape precisely, right, etc. That's why the volume 1 covers the West, and volume 2 covers beyond the West, right? So you associate modernity and modernization with some kind of a civilizational dynamic, and then argue that even as this dynamic took shape in Europe, nevertheless, when it traverses, when this dynamic traverses other spaces, it does not retain that original shape that came from the European form, as it were, right? In fact, in his introduction, and perhaps he's being too optimistically, he leaves it. He says it is up to his contributors, to decide, whether the patterns of modernity and its reception in non-Western cultures, how that is to be taken forward, right? So the and I will allude to some of the contributions of that volume presently, right? But I think it's important to address this. Unfortunately, this work is not available in our library, or at least when I tried to access it in our library, I couldn't get it at all, etc. But if there are others who can access this book and through other sites, please share it with me, etc. But nevertheless, I think it's important in fact, I remember reading this back in Goa, and then I had also photocopied the introduction, but I seem to have misplaced it. I'm searching for it, and if I find it, I will. Once I find it, I will actually make it available to you on the classroom, right? But I think it's important that some of these thoughts be. I mean, it's important that any clarificatory exercise spring from these orders of clarification that are being indicated, right? I mean, in a manner of speaking, and as he says it in his introduction, Eisenstadt leaves it to its contributors, okay, about how they go about relating the patterns of modernity and its reception in non-Western cultures. Okay, okay, but also urges that while descriptively they may engage with these with this with with how to relate the patterns of modernity and its reception in non-Western cultures, he urges that it's imperative that they also seek to explain it, right? What is the motive force of this diffusion, right? As it were. Okay. Now, in fact, in the latter volume, the second volume, Beyond the West, right? You can see that it consistently examines the contents of that volume, consistently examines the validity of a single Western model of modernity, right? So somewhere along the way, even as modernity may have, taken shape in Europe in whatever form, nevertheless, it has got diffused, right? And there is a need to examine the validity of a single Western model of modernity. In fact, in that volume, the second volume, there are essays on Russia, there are essays on China, there are essays on Japan, there are essays on Southeast Asia, there are on India, the Islamic world, and so on, right? Etc. Okay, and I will, of course, allude to some of those contributions in my summation in my lecture. But I think it's important for us I hope, I think I will stop here for the moment and ask whether you're getting, you're getting my trajectory right? You're getting what I'm, of course, what I'm setting up as orders of clarification, which is important. In what ways we should elaborate on them, right? I think that you'll have to wait for the course to unravel. But as I said, these initial clarifications are important to take into account, and that these clarifications must also be, participating in those earlier moments, in those moments that are more contemporary that I try to outline in my preliminary remarks. But are there any clarifications, doubts that you would want to clarify at this point? Okay, so anyway, we can't just be, so we'll have to have some action. I mean, it's like directing a movie, saying that cut and then action, and cut and so on. And I don't think we can follow a script as it were. But I think what I've tried to point out is that I mean what I've tried to do in the uh, 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 substantive part of my lecture, essentially about these clarifications. I said that you know that I mean I started with this idea that modernity, I mean howsoever fashioned, um, okay, is essentially uh, about change, about patterns of change. Okay, we may even call it rational change, right? And it is and while in the understanding of these patterns of change, or in the summations of rational change, the older versions of modernization theory may have faltered. Nevertheless, there is an important question about the pace of change that was being articulated. But again, this question of the pace of change, I mean, the real I mean, I just now got an alert that video effects. Uh, I mean, there are too many video effects running, etc. So I do because this is something that we never encountered earlier. But this is, I mean, sometimes I'm losing the network connection. I don't know. This, you can hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. No, no, I don't know. I mean, it's the network is very volatile today. I don't know why, but anyway, uh, yeah, it's. I don't know. I mean, Akshay is also alerted that the internet connection in the hostel is quite terrible today, which is true. I think even here, you know, I mean, I have my electricity is fine, but there is some disruption. Anyway, I don't. I mean, I've lost the thread. Are there any? I'll get back to this in the next class. I'll kind of rehearse some of these steps in the next class. But then, are there any questions for the moment about what we have traversed in today's class? Any? Uh, I hope I'm clear in setting up the terms. I mean, my
Yes, sir.
clarifications don't require or clarifications or more clarifications. Yeah. Yes, Ronak, you were about to say something.
No, sir, I just responded to you saying, yeah, you have been very clear, sir, today.
Okay. Uh, okay. So I think we should wind up. I think we should wind up now, and I will. I'll take this forward in the next class, right? And I mean, hopefully Akshay and Rose will send the recording across to me, and then I'll put it up on the Google Classroom, uh, and for whatever it is worth. But I think we need some solutions, and I think we need to alert the authorities about this.
Sir, could we record the meeting on Zoom somehow? If we
No,
have a
but
meeting,
Zoom needs a license, right?
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, yeah. It needs a license. No, we'll have to think of some options because I see back in 2020 when initially when the uh, COVID interruption happened. In fact, for the first month, uh, when we started with the online classes, I mean, our department had invested in a Zoom license, which is just one license. So uh, I mean, two classes couldn't be held simultaneously with one license, but we did have it. But then we didn't find it very. I mean, we needed more licenses and so on, and we'll have to think. Anyway, let's think this out. I mean, now that it is very clear that obviously recording is not permissible, then the university should make some arrangements for us.
Sir, you can do recordings on Zoom without a license, like even with a free account. The only issue is that then there are time limits on the meetings.
Right. Okay.
Yes, I think there's a 1 hour cap or a 45-minute cap or something.
No, but it's better to get into a license thing because these stopgap solutions, I mean, so your students also will have to mount a pressure, you know. Uh, I mean, so all of us are for change, but it's the pace of change, right? In fact, a recent commentator has called India as the elephant paradigm, right? And he was invoking the paradigm of elephant just to say that, change in India happens very slowly, unlike, say, these Asian tigers and so on. So he was invoking against the paradigm of tigers, uh, the notion of the elephant. In fact, he has a book, Gurshavan Das. He has a book called The Elephant Paradigm, I think. Anyway, we'll have to think of something in the coming days.